Welcome to episode 6 of the Life in Norway Show. Is Norway really the happiest place on earth? It's questions like this that I hope to answer as I interview fellow foreigners who live and work right here in Norway. Today I'm joined by a Canadian for the first time, but not just any Canadian. Artur Wilczynski is the Canadian ambassador to Norway. I'm honoured that Artur agreed to take time out of what you will hear is a very hectic schedule to talk with me about his work as a diplomat, relations between Canada and Norway, and his thoughts on Norway and Norwegian lifestyle after 3 years living here. You can read more about the ambassador, the work of the Canadian Embassy in Norway, and get links to everything we discuss on the show on the show notes page at lifeinnorway.net/episode 6. Happy listening. I'd like to welcome Artur Wilczynski to the Life in Norway show, the Canadian ambassador to Norway. Artur, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
Very well. And yourself?
I'm great. It's a nice snowy day here in Oslo. It's a good start to the season.
Indeed. It is that time of the year as we're speaking. Artur, you've been here for around 3 years now. Now, I'm curious to know what brought you to Norway. That's normally the first question I ask every guest on the show. But also, I'd like to add a second question to that. How does one become an ambassador?
So you almost answered the first question there. So I was named Canada's ambassador to Norway in September of 2014. That's when the government of Canada announced that I had been selected. And I arrived here in November 2014 as Canada's ambassador. And so that's what brought me here in the first place. And it's been a fantastic 3 years. In terms of how does one become an ambassador, oddly enough, it's a bit of a strange process. And in a lot of countries, it's different. But my background is I'm a professional public servant. I've had a long career in the government of Canada, working in a range of government ministries, whether it's on culture and human rights on one side, all the way to national security and counterterrorism. Had a broad career and came into the foreign ministry about 8 years ago, and served as a director general for security in our foreign ministry for a number of years. And after 4 years in that role, being in the foreign ministry, they actually literally show you the door and say it's time to go out into the diplomatic world. And I won the lottery and was asked to be Canada's ambassador here. So that's how I ended up here, and that's how they pick. It's based on your experience, based on your career, and based on your background. So
is there a choice involved, or do they actually approach you for a specific handpicked assignment?
It's complicated, right? So every year there are lists of available posts, and you can apply for them. But it's, at the end of the day, it's a bit of a matchmaking process. Is where are your interests? Where can you go? We talked about this in the past. I'm here with my husband. The number of places in the world where somebody can go with their same-sex spouse as their spouse are few. Sure. It's a real issue in terms of where we can go. Western Europe is an area where I know that we could go. So this is where I focused my attention. Norway actually wasn't even on the list the year I applied. It became open after the process had begun, and I was approached. And we came here on holiday in the summer and fell in love with the place, and went back and went, sure, that sounds like a great place. It was we loved it here. It was super welcoming. I felt comfortable as a Canadian being here in Norway, and that's how we ended up here. But you do have some choice. I mean, you can apply, but just because you apply for a place doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Okay, interesting. So I think a lot of people who do live abroad probably have a reasonable idea of the role of an ambassador and a country's consulate or embassy in a different country. But I have listeners from all around the world, many of whom are living in their home country. Can you describe the role of an embassy and specifically of an ambassador in a foreign country in this day and age?
Well, I think actually the role of ambassadors are changing. It used to be the main way that governments would speak to one another. So, and there still is a role associated with that. As, I go in and meet with counterparts in the Norwegian government, whether it's in the foreign minister or the defense ministry, or different officials, to convey official messages between our governments. But that's becoming less and less the role of an ambassador. I see more and more ambassadors are the spokespersons for their country in their country of accreditation. So I see a big part of my job as engaging with and speaking with Norwegians, talking about Canada, talking about the relationship, saying why the relationship is important. And the reason why I do that is because it helps create opportunities in a number of areas. On one side, it's very important in terms of the economic relationship between countries. Just raising the awareness of what are for example, economic opportunities in different sectors, whether it's in aquaculture, whether or not it's in high-tech medical technologies, whether or not it's in energy and green technologies. Just talking about what Canada is doing about those things here helps generate interest amongst Norwegian companies and Norwegians around possibly investing, possibly partnering. And the same thing on political issues. So, for example, I talk a lot about issues such as gender equality, human rights, religious equality, countering discrimination, LGBT issues, because these are important values that reflect my country. And I engage with partners in Norway in order to talk about what we share, to learn from one another when there are areas where there are differences, and hopefully to try and bridge those differences. And the embassy is a sort of a focal point for organizing the range of activities that go to support my role as ambassador. The other issue is, as like you said, is consular. There's a very practical role that embassies play in terms of providing service to citizens in their country. There's quite a number of Canadians here in Norway. We estimate around 3,000, though that fluctuates, and it depends which center you're in. The population is linked to that. So they come for things such as passport services. When Canadian tourists come here and they need emergency assistance, we're there to help them and liaise with Norwegian officials to help them in times of trouble. So it's a wide range of activities. One of the specific things that we do here in Norway, which is I think unique to our embassy here in Oslo, is we have an Arctic Center. So Canada's International Arctic Center, which actually has a global mandate. It works around the world on Arctic policy questions. But it's actually based here in Norway because of the Arctic infrastructure that is here. You've got the Arctic Council that is based here in Tromsø. You've got the Arctic Economic Council. It's close proximity to a large number of Arctic Council states. So we actually have that here in Norway. So again, it's a wide range of activities. But again, I see my number one job as being the lead cheerleader for Canada in Norway.
Sure. So as well as the environment, what are some of the areas where Canada and Norway have a close working relationship? What are the areas you get involved in most?
As I said, Arctic I think is a key issue for us. For both Norway and Canada, such large parts of our territory are Arctic related. We have indigenous populations in both countries. So talking about those questions and working with indigenous peoples is really important. In Norway, again, I work a lot on human rights issues, just in terms of engaging, for example, with immigrant and refugee communities here in Norway to try and share some of Canada's experience around integration and immigration with Norwegian officials. Energy is a big sector economically for us. It still is. So I work very closely with companies such as Statoil, but also work very closely with government officials, whether or not it's in the energy and oil ministry or others. Aquaculture is huge. I was in Trondheim earlier this year for Aquanor, which is a key part of the economic relationship between our countries. Norwegian companies such as Marine Harvest, Grieg Seafoods, these are big companies here in Norway that have significant investments in Canada. So working with them on the range of political and economic and regulatory issues associated with aquaculture is a key part of my job. But then again, there's personal interests that are part of that as well. You know, my background, like I said, as a gay man, I work very closely with LGBT organizations here in Oslo, but also, as you know, we talked a little bit earlier, I visited Trondheim for Trondheim Pride. For me, that's an important part to be visible and engaged on those issues. Same thing. I've worked very closely with the Jewish community, the very small Jewish community here in Norway. This past week, I participated in a commemoration of Kristallnacht, which was the attack, the pogrom by Nazi Germany against its citizens in 1938. I walked with Erwin Cohen, the president of the Jewish community in Norway, and Prime Minister Solberg, plus my Israeli colleague here the other night, to commemorate that event, and also to highlight the importance of memory as a way to ensure that our future is one where we bring people together as opposed to divide. So those are just, again, some of the range of issues. It's broad where we work, and there are, I haven't even touched some of the security issues. We're NATO friends and allies. We have a deep cooperation in the context of NATO and security, and that's something that's only going to get stronger as we move forward.
Sure. So it's a very broad role and a very busy role, it sounds like.
Well, it's a great role. It's actually, I go through, every time I have the opportunity to talk about the range of issues that I engage on, it brings makes me happy to be very, very direct.
Sure.
Because it's a real honor. I mean, like, these are things that people talk about around their dinner tables. These are issues that interest a wide range of individuals. People feel passionately about these issues. Regardless of what side of any particular question they're in, they're deeply held views. And I'm lucky in that Her Majesty, the Queen of Canada, actually has asked me to do this as my job. So again, I feel remarkably privileged to be in this position. And I think that having this kind of privilege, it's my responsibility to use this opportunity to talk about some important issues.
Sure. Returning to some of those issues for a moment, we've just had a general election recently here in Norway, and obviously the areas that Canada and Norway have a mutual interest in, such as the Arctic, were a fairly hot issue during the election campaigns. And with you having the ear of many important people through the country, to what extent did you get involved in those conversations around the election campaign, or was it very much a arm's length process for you?
I'm a diplomat. I, in no way, shape, or form, am here to engage during an election campaign on issues that are particularly at play here in Norway. That's completely for Norwegians to decide. That's completely, a reflection of the domestic situation here. And Norway's interests and Norway's approaches to all of these questions are not necessarily the same as Canada's, but the reality is that our realities are different. Canada has its experience, whether or not it's on immigration or Arctic or energy, or aquaculture for that matter, that is quite different from Norway's. And it's not that one is right, the other one isn't. It's just that they're different. And part of my job is to explain and answer questions when they're there. But election times, diplomats, we take a far back seat.
Sure
we work with everyone on all sides of the political aisle in Norway, and that's really, really important, because at the end of the day, the relationship with Norway is incredibly positive. I actually think that the political spectrum, compared to other countries and even compared to Canada here in Norway, is rather small. You don't have these wild differences in political opinion. There are broad consensus on a lot of important issues, and I think that that's one of the reasons why Norway is so successful and so prosperous.
Good stuff, Artur. We've had a nice chat about your role, but after the break, I want to grill you a little bit about your thoughts and opinions on Norway and living amongst the Norwegians.
Uh-oh, okay.
This episode of the Life in Norway show is supported by listeners just like you. If you're enjoying these interviews, please consider supporting the show from just $2 a month. That's less than the price of a simple black coffee here in Norway. Not only will your support guarantee the future of the show, supporters also get access to exclusive Q&A podcasts, where you can ask any question about Norway and I'll do my very best to answer it. You'll also get to ask questions of our future podcast guests and get free or discounted ebooks. To support Life in Norway from just $2 a month, visit patreon.com/Life in Norway. That's patreon.com/Life in Norway. And now back to the show. Welcome back to the Life in Norway show. I'm with Artur Wilczynski, the Canadian ambassador to Norway. Speaking of Norway, Artur, you've been here for 3 years now. Am I right in thinking you spend just as much time out of Oslo as in Oslo?
I spend a great deal of time outside of Oslo. For me, it's really, really important to get out and see this fantastic country. It's big. And I think one of the great things about being an ambassador is that you actually do have the opportunity to visit the width and length, particularly the length of Norway. So I've been everywhere from Kirkenes down to Kristiansand. I've spent a lot of time in Tromsø and the Lofotens. I've been to Hammer near Lillehammer for hockey games a couple of times. Stavanger, Bergen. I mean, it's been great. So I do spend a lot of time outside, including in Trondheim. Like as we said, I was there just about a month and a half ago, I think, for Trondheim Pride.
Well, having just written a guidebook to Norway, I don't meet many people that have travelled Norway more than me, but I think you qualify. So well done.
Well, it's actually funny. One of the things that's interesting living here in Oslo is I get to go to places where I think the vast majority of people in the city have not been to.
Sure.
And I still remember having a discussion with a Norwegian friend here about Norway's crown jewels. I had just visited the Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim, and I visited the museum there, and was coming back and was talking about the crown jewels, and they said, "No, we don't have crown jewels." I said, "Yes, you do." No, we don't do that at all. I said, "I saw them." So, it's Norwegians, I think, when they get on airplanes, the vast majority of them seem to head south. I encourage them to head north. It's just such a beautiful country, and with so much diversity in terms of both its people, but its landscapes. It's great.
Well, I mean, I've travelled extensively here in Norway, but that's just made me realise how little I used to travel in Britain before I moved away. So I guess that's the thing. Okay, so living in Oslo and having lived in Norway for 3 years, do you live a typical Canadian lifestyle, or have you been influenced at all by living amongst the Norwegians?
I'm not sure what a typical Canadian lifestyle is.
Neither am I.
Look, I think you adapt to the way of life in the city and the community that you're in. I've always loved the outdoors, and that hasn't changed since we've come here. So in the summers, we love going hiking. We love cycling. I like running. So I was sporty before I came here, and it's great to I feel somewhat I should say underperforming given how athletic and outdoorsy Norwegians are. I thought I was pretty good at doing those things, but Norwegians excel at it, and for me, it's just a really comfortable fit. But as an ambassador, as a diplomat, I wouldn't say it's just different. Like our obligations, the types of things that we're asked to do on a fairly regular basis, aren't typical for anyone. It's not a typical lifestyle in Canada. It's not a typical lifestyle for Norwegians. But you try and make sure that you have a a good balance. And one of the things that we've done here is I play in a band, and so we just had our band practice last night, and I play with my colleague from the U.S. and some my partners in it, and some Norwegian friends. And we go out and we play at clubs here in Oslo every once in a while. So I know music is an important part of life here as well. I don't know if that's typically Norwegian, but it's just remarkably comfortable. So as a foreigner here, I feel incredibly at home. As a Canadian, again with the snow falling here, this feels a lot like home. I just wish that my Norwegian was better.
I have to ask, are you a covers band or do you write your own material?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. We have written a bunch of our own stuff, but we do covers. Again, we're guys of a certain age, so our set list includes quite a number of tunes from the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Though we have thrown a couple of Norwegian numbers in there for good measure.
Excellent stuff. You mentioned Norwegian there. I assume you speak at least English and French fluently. How is the Norwegian? Is it a requirement to learn the language when you take a role like this?
So in some countries it is, but in Norway, it isn't. Again, Norwegians, I don't know if this is your assessment to someone from the UK, but they speak better English than I do. And so it's very easy to function here as an English speaker. As a French speaker, it's more challenging. There's relatively few people here who speak fluent French, particularly in the business or government circles. I tried. I took. This is going to sound like a spectacular failure on my part. I took lessons for my first year here, but it was basically 1 hour once a week, and it got to the point where I could kind of sort of engage with my teacher, but anytime I tried to put it in practice, like at a coffee shop, or either they would change to English right away, or they'd ask me a series of questions that I didn't understand, so I switched to English. So I just kind of felt this made me feel rather bad.
I think a lot of people would recognize that situation. I mean, with language learning, I always think it's a step process, and unless you're immersed, then it's really difficult to get over that first step. And
that's the problem, is right. Like, as diplomats, you are insulated from that. I think it's quite different from people who are here as business people, or as immigrants, or as newcomers for whatever reason that brought them here. In the diplomatic universe, you are insulated, and I actually think that's one of the negatives. I wish that I could engage. Language is such an important part of understanding a people and a culture. And without it, I actually feel hamstrung. But the opportunities to learn it to a level that would actually be effective, it would just take up such a huge part of my time that I'd be not fulfilling my core role as Canada's ambassador here.
Oh, I think I can. A lot of people will be able to understand that for sure.
Still makes me feel guilty.
Sure. Okay, so you mentioned Norwegians being sporty and outdoorsy, which absolutely 100% true. What else have you learned about the lifestyle here on your travels?
Well, the lifestyles are actually quite different depending on where you are. I find that there's quite a range of personalities in Norway, and I know there's a few colleagues who have written books about life and culture in Norway. But I do think that Oslo culture is different from Bergen, is different from the high north. There's a difference between the countryside and larger communities. I think one of the things that I would say is I think Norwegians are very independent. I think that they are very focused people that are results oriented. Perhaps, I don't know if this falls into too much of a stereotype, but occasionally, or just language issues, but they're economical with words, but they're meaningful. Right? You have to listen, because when they say something, it's important. They don't just kind of chit chat for no particular reason. But it's in terms of other aspects of life. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting is that here in Norway, people don't seem to go, maybe this is again just my experience, go out as much as in groups. I don't know if, unless there's a particular specific occasion.
Sure.
We've made some friends here, but that's been a bit of a challenge. We've got a couple of really good close friends that we've developed here, but I think that there's a certain utility to relationships here in Norway. Like, people don't just get together with somebody new just for a cup of coffee. There's usually a reason why that first interaction takes place, and that's a little different. I mean, it's just something that we've grown accustomed to since we've arrived.
It sounds very familiar. I mean, for me, I've been here 6 years now, and I can count the number of Norwegian friends, and I use that term to mean, a good close friend on one hand. Most of my friends and people I speak to on a daily basis are from all over the world, and that's just the way it is here. People have friends from school, from college. There's not the culture of mixing with your work colleagues as much as maybe in Britain or elsewhere. It's just a different thing to get used to.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that as a manager in Norway was a little different. When I first got here, I was kind of used to management approaches from a Canadian point of view, North American point of view, and my expectations in terms of when and how to engage with colleagues had to be adjusted. Work-life balance here is different than work-life balance in Canada, and quite frankly, I like it here better than. But it was an adjustment, and you have to figure out how do you fit into the rhythm of life in a country. And this is my first diplomatic posting. Some of my colleagues who are more experienced in this, they probably know how to do that a lot faster than I did. But it was, I think, one of the key lessons for me as a newcomer here is parking my habits and how I've done things, and then trying to adapt to the way that people do things here. And it's been great. Again, like we've had a wonderful time here. The relationships, whether or not professional or personal, have been good. Not everybody even back home becomes your best friend after 5 minutes. That only happens in the U.S. But it's here. It's been really, really positive. Every engagement that I've had has been really quite supportive, and I enjoy that.
You've mentioned several places around the country you visited on your travels.
Yeah.
Anything that really sticks out, whether that's for work reasons or for personal reasons? Maybe you got to spend some extra time somewhere and found a nice secluded beach or a really interesting museum or something like that.
In a country as beautiful as this, that's a real tough one, because a lot, and I won't, if I pick one place that I've been back to 6 times since I've been here and loved it are the Lofotens. Every time I go, no matter what time of year, I've been there in January, I've been there in June. It's spectacular. Just as a place, the light there in the winter time is truly magical. So I get a really incredible vibe from that, and it's just really really spectacular. But in terms of like personal experiences, I still won't forget it. I was invited not last winter, but the winter before, in 2016, to go up to Finnmark to go reindeer herding with some Sami friends. And it was a visit first to Kautokeino and then to Karasjok with this, experience overnight at a cabin out on snowmobiles. And I will take that memory. I felt that I learned so much. It was an opportunity to hear and just listen to the experiences of some of my Sami friends about what life is like for them here. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities? And I was incredibly honored to have that opportunity. It's funny. I think a lot of people expect a Canadian knows how to use a snowmobile. I grew up in Montreal, and I had been on a snowmobile maybe like 15, 20 minutes, just kind of puttering around in a parking lot. But here we actually had to take the snowmobile to the cabin. It was a mode of transport. It wasn't just a toy. And before we left, my friends told me it was going to take us about 2 hours. We're kind of making our way through the brush, and my friend came back on his snowmobile to me. He says, the snowmobiles goes a little faster than 11 kilometers an hour. If we keep on going at this pace, it'll be tomorrow morning by the time we show up at the cabin. So it was also a learning opportunity and a little bit humbling in terms of my experience in snow.
Good stuff. Okay, before we come on to the final questions, you're quite well known in Norway for being somebody that's on social media and takes advantage of, especially Twitter, maybe some others as well, but I know you from Twitter. You share images, videos, clips, thoughts about where you are, the kind of events you go to. You also retweet several Life in Norway articles from time to time, so thank you very much for that. Why is that? Is it something you're told to do, or is it more of a personal interest reason that you use Twitter, or something else?
So I think it's a little bit of both. I think increasingly governments are using social media to get messages out, to share experiences, to share perspectives and official statements. And I probably do it more than your usual ambassador, because I actually think it's an important way of increasing accessibility. I'm here not to do things in the shadow. When I do something it's because I think it's important, because Canada thinks it's important, and it's therefore something that we want to share. And I can't call up NRK every day and say, "Hey, follow me around. I'm doing all these important things." Sometimes they cover me, sometimes they don't. But I think that using things like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram, like LinkedIn, I use all of those, like YouTube, all of those social media platforms help increase the accessibility of the Embassy and of Canada to Norwegians. It's also a way for Canadians and others who are interested in the range of issues that I do social media on, or that I do, to follow me, to comment, to engage. I quite frankly, I get a lot of messages from people on Facebook. I've actually organized meetings with ministers using Facebook. It's a really interesting way of getting together. I mean, I'll give you one example that I think is also an important way of connecting. I tweeted about cooperation between Canada and Norway on climate issues, and that tweet was retweeted by Canada's Minister of the Environment and by Norway's Minister of the Environment. So, just in terms of showing engagement, looking at issues that are important, demonstrating to both everyday citizens, whether Canadian, Norwegian, or other, what it is that it's important, but also leaders, that we play an important role in bridging the dialogue between our countries.
And coming on one of Norway's leading English language podcasts probably does no harm either.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's great to be here, and I think that you do a great job in talking about and making Norway accessible to a broad audience. I think that it's really important to share what the experiences are of people from with the English speaking world, and you do an excellent job. And again, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my views.
Thank you very much. Before I leave, I have 3 questions which I ask every guest.
Yes, sir.
What is the best thing about living in Norway?
It's the best thing about living in Norway. Being able to engage with Norwegians on issues that I care about, just the conversations, the engagement. I mean, a lot of people talk about the nature, and yeah, that's beautiful. I come from Canada; we've got a lot of nature. It's the people, I think, that make it unique, and the opportunity to talk to them every day is something that I really truly appreciate.
Okay, what's the most challenging thing about living in Norway?
Yeah. What's the most challenging thing about
Most people say the weather, but I guess coming from Canada, you won't say that either.
Oh, the weather here is actually quite mild compared to back home. Back home, winters are minus 35 in Ottawa. Here, I think if it's minus 10, people get all freaked out. No, look, part of the challenge about being is being this far away from home. It's there aren't direct flights between Canada and Norway. My family live on the west coast of Canada, so that's 9-hour time difference. My parents and my partner's parents are getting up there in years, and that's a challenge to be so far away from everybody that you grew up with and that's important in your life. So that's difficult. But this is a really great place. I mean, it's hard to talk about what's difficult here because it's one of the best places in the world to live. If I was to complain about one thing, this is more an Oslo thing, is I'm not too fond of cyclists on sidewalks. I've been sideswiped more than a few times, and I'm convinced that I'm going to end up in the hospital one day. But that's just that's more an urban thing here.
It's against the law in Britain. You're not allowed to ride on sidewalks or pavements, and so that, for me, when I moved to Oslo, that was a huge adjustment that I've kind of forgotten about now, actually, having adjusted completely to it.
Well, no, where I live on a hill, and there's a corner, a blind corner, and cyclists on the sidewalk don't see me until it's too late. So either you do get brushed more than once. But then again, in Canada we don't do that. Cyclists are on the road. That's not the way it is here. So again, it goes back to you have to adjust. Sometimes a little grumpily to those things, but.
Well, if cyclists on the pavements are one of the worst things about living in Norway, we can't be doing too bad over here.
No, seriously.
My final question you've actually already answered, which is your favourite place in Norway. So instead, I'm going to ask if you have any message for any of the 3,000 Canadians living in Norway or any of the Canadians back home that might be listening.
Well, no, just to tell them that this is a great relationship that we have with Norway. I don't know if we started off with this, but this is the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Canada and Norway. And to the Canadians that are here, to let them know that if there's anything that I can do or the embassy can do to support them, or if any services that they need, please feel free to contact us at the embassy. Engage with me on issues or on questions. Through any of the social media channels that I talked about. To Canadians who might be listening back home, I'm really thrilled that you're listening to a podcast about Norway. I think that it's the relationship that we have is really important, and one of the things that I feel is at times it's undervalued. So for those who are listening about this relationship and listen to you regularly, I think they'll know about how significant a country Norway is, how important it is economically, politically, from a security point of view, how engaged it is on international issues, whether or not it's peace and security or development and trade. Talk about it, and also take the time and engage with me as your ambassador here in Norway. I'm happy always to talk to people from around the world.
Speaking of engaging with you, what's your Twitter handle so people can give you a follow?
At Artur Max, so it's at ARTUR MAKS, and the Max is just my middle name, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Excellent. Well, I will put that in the show notes, which will be at lifeinnorway.net/episode 6. Artur, thank you so much for spending this time with us today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Have a great day.